Yate, Marcus Neljanisha, Maidash Gijni Nishle, Ushia Bashishti, Tuaba and Dashache, Bitahni Dashanella. Hello, my name is Marcus Nels. I am from rural New Mexico. I belong to the Navajo Nation in the Southwest. I grew up in a border town next to the Zuni Pueblo and Navajo reservations. New Mexico's Navajo reservation came into existence when the people who were returning from the long walk decided to stay rather than continue back to the desert allotment in Arizona, where the main reservation was allotted by the U.S. Cavalry. The Long Walk was one of many military roundups of indigenous people to clear the land for settler colonialization in the region. From northern Arizona to southern New Mexico, the Navajo people walked about 300 miles with no aid from their captors. Many indigenous tribes in the Southwest faced similar consequences after intense resistance and revolts. At the founding of the U.S. Empire, the indigenous population paid with its blood, and the imperialist empire we know today is built on the continued suffering of my people on this land. From the colonization by Spain in 1492 to the counter-revolution of 1776, otherwise known as the American Revolution, Native Americans were the target of genocide. From 1776 to 1865, slavery and land dispossession of Native and Black people created the basis for the formation of the United States, all of which was justified by the colonizers using the racist doctrine of manifest destiny. From the building of the Transcontinental Railroad to the Western expansion, colonizers slaughtered the indigenous people of America for resource extraction and to wipe out all trace of their existence. From cultural and traditional life of many indigenous people was forcefully erased. The Canadian government used residential schools, like the U.S. boarding school, to separate children from families, suppress indigenous languages, violently assimilate native populations. For over 500 years, the United States has been at war with the indigenous people of America. In 2016, American Indians and Alaskan Natives were recorded at being 26.6% impoverished, which is the highest of any race group in the United States. As a consequence, many indigenous people on and off the reservation continue to struggle with addiction, which we must understand is a symptom of the ongoing national oppression. Contrary to popular belief, majority of Native people are increasingly a part of urban working class and live in cities due to lack of jobs and higher education opportunities on the reservations. Native American reservations are being forced to sell their mineral rights and underground resources to major corporations in order to stay afloat in a failing capitalist economy. Many tribal governments has tossed aside their own interests of their own communities in order to make a quick buck in a capitalist society. On reservations, oil and mining companies have extracted vast amounts of resources while only paying a small fraction of the profits back to the people living in those areas. Those major mining and extraction companies have never compensated communities for the devastating detriments of the health of communities and the integrity of the land. Uranium mining has been a staple of wealth for the military-industrial complex for many years in New Mexico. Multiple Pueblo tribes and Navajo people were unknowingly exposed to dangerous amounts of radiation from dust sediments and water contamination. The most outrageous catastrophe that has happened in the Southwest is the Redwater Pond uranium spill near Church Rock, New Mexico in 1979. This is the greatest high-level radioactive spill in the country's history and the third largest in the world after Chernobyl and Fukushima. On many reservations across North America, indigenous tribes have been forced into similar circumstances. In 2016, the struggle against the Dakota Access Pipeline in South Dakota was an eruption from many years of continued oppression. No DAPL was the second largest movement of modern Native American history that united many Native tribes and other communities across the United States. The U.S. government continues to not uphold land treaties and allows corporations to do as they please, resulting in environmental catastrophes. The United States government does not recognize the self-determination of Native nations. In the history of Native resistance, AIM, the American Indian Movement, was founded in 1968 as a revival of spiritual traditions and political struggle. AIM created the first Indian urban-based healthcare system in the United States. They also led a march on Washington, D.C. to occupy the Bureau of Indian Affairs during the Nixon administration and held a 71-day occupation of Wounded Knee against U.S. armed forces to end corruption in both the BIA and tribal governments. Both AIM and No DAPL sparked a political awareness in many Native communities, showing that resistance has always been a very strong core of indigenous culture in America. Violence by the U.S. government has not only been unleashed upon indigenous and black people here, but also abroad. After years of experience in homegrown terrorism, the U.S. military started expanding its terror into South America, Asia, and Africa. After World War II, the United States flexed its power in a war-torn world by seizing old imperialist control of oppressed and colonized nations. Much like the indigenous population in America, third world countries continue to resist U.S. imperialism. A common thread has been woven into oppressed people of the world. The horrific experiences shared together has created the basis for multinational unity for the creation of a better society, a socialist society. Socialism calls for the end to this imperialist system that continues to oppress indigenous people across the world. Socialism calls for an end to mining and extraction on native lands and seizing the assets that these companies use for cleanup. Socialism calls for the end of poverty, for basic human necessities to be met for all people. Only socialism can begin to address the centuries of injustices and damages caused to the Native nations in a tangible way. Socialism calls for political, economical, and cultural independence for Native nations. Socialism would mean self-determination and sovereignty for Native nations and all oppressed nations. This is why I fight for socialism. This is why I'm a socialist. Thank you.